welcome to the Kellogg Biological Station Experiment with Scientists. Do birds avoid noisy habitats? This is part 4, and in this part we're going to talk about, okay, once we're done thinking about the question and collecting the data, now what do we do with the data and what's next? My name is Elizeth, and I am a PhD student at Michigan State University. So once, if you remember from part number 3, that I was writing how many birds I saw and heard, and I'm writing all of this in this data sheets, right? So what do we do with those data sheets? Usually the next step is to enter them in the computer. And once we have them in a computer, now what we have to do is analyze the data. Why do we analyze the data? Well, this is the part where we're really going to find out if we are seeing a pattern in nature or not. So, for example, I could just say, well, after doing all this field work, I do think that there are less birds when, it's very noisy, but because this is science and it's not enough with our opinion or with our gut feeling, we need a way to see if that gut feeling, if it's kind of true or not. And to do that, we use statistics. And you can see overall trends or patterns using Excel, but most people are going to use stats programs like the one I'm using in this picture that is called R, but there are many others. In my case, I use this program because it's free, and anything you need about how to use it, you can find it online. So I really like this one. And something else that we usually do as we're analyzing data is before that, we'll look for mistakes, or maybe we enter some of the data wrong. So kind of like clean that data and make sure that everything is right, but also plot our data, kind of like visualize some of the results. Some people do that before analyzing, so some people do that after. I do a little bit of both. And then once we have our results, and we can visualize it, we have to do it in a way that everyone can understand when they see it. So this is the figure that I used for the paper that I published that I'm going to explain in a few minutes. But one of the cool things about figures is that you can just look at it and right away kind of like know the results. So here we have on the y-axis the number of birds, and the arrow is going up. So that means that as you move up, the number of birds increases. And then on the x-axis, we have the sound level, so how loud it is. And in this case, as we move to the right towards the arrow, that means it gets louder. Okay, so now we are going to look at the red line that is in the middle, and that is the trend that I found in my data. Now, when you look at this line, is this line going down? Is it going up? Is it a flat line? It's going down, right? So what does this mean? This means that as the sound levels increase, the number of birds decreases. And remember that the number of birds is what I was measuring. So the sound levels is the experiment, what I created outside in the field. And then the number of birds is all the data that I'm recording in the field. So basically, yes, birds do avoid this loud environment. Now, once I had all of this, usually the next step is to write it not just for your thesis, but also to write it in a scientific journal. And This is the first paper that I got to publish as a student. And you can see on the top right, there's a red box. So it says Journal of Applied Ecology. This is the journal where I published, and this is one journal of many, many, many journals that you can pick to publish your data. In my type of research, because it was not just basic ecology, it was also kind of applied, and I wanted people to use this data for to make decisions in later on in the environment regarding sound levels. This is why I chose this journal. But anyway, there are many journals, and you can choose the one that you think fits the story that you have to tell. And this paper, it usually includes an abstract, an introduction, then a section with methods where you explain how you did everything, all your experiments, then how you analyze your data, then results, and a discussion. So you have to write all of this. And if you look at the red arrow, you would see there's my name and then two other names. So these are the other people that not only helped me with my project from the beginning to end, with stats, with fieldwork, but also helped me write this paper. So those are the co-authors. But I mentioned here the journal that I chose, but again, there are many, many journals. And also in my case, because I was doing a master's degree and I want to stay in academia, that's why I chose a scientific journal. But if you want to make your results or your data available, publishing in a scientific journal is not the only way. You can present your results at a conference, you can present them in a class or doing outreach. Also, a lot of people that work in the government, they have to write reports. So there are many ways that you can use to make your results available. And then depending on what way you pick, those results are going to be visible only to the scientific community or only to people that work in nature or maybe to everyone. For example, in my case, with my article, that's available to, mostly universities that pay that license to see scientific journals. But then when I presented a poster, that was available to all the people that went to the conference, whether they work in the government or they're students or their faculty. So it's going to depend a little bit. Then, okay, I got my paper and I found that birds do avoid noisy habitats. And how did I end up at Michigan State in the entomology department, which is a department that studies insects and plant and insect interactions? Well, I mentioned, I think it was in part number 1 or part number 2, that I consider myself an ecologist also. So someone that studies all the organisms and their connections and how they interact with each other, but also with the environment. And this is because when I was done with my project and I was done studying noise pollution, I started to get very interested in the ecological questions more than the organisms itself. So I still have a huge, huge passion for birds, but I kind of like wanted to go towards a different type of research and more like a general ecological questions. And this is how I ended up at Michigan State. Here, I'm studying how climate change alters ecosystems, but more specifically, heat waves. So those kind of like very few days that unfortunately we have to go through in the summer where it is extremely hot, and how those alter communities. that was a question that I had in mind and that I wanted to study. To answer this question, I could have used birds like I did for my master's degree, or I could have used, I don't know, rodents or insects maybe, but I wanted to pick something different, another organism that maybe was more at the bottom of the pyramid and that will give me a different view of the type of research that I want to do, which is why I chose plants. This image, I don't know if you can see all those pink and red flags. Those belong to plots. They're like this big, that each one of them has a plant community. So basically a ton of plants of different species, some of them native, some of them non-native. And if you can see those tents, those plastic tents, that is the tents that I'm using to apply a heat wave. So basically, I'm increasing the temperature underneath those tents to mimic a heat wave. To answer this question about how heat waves alter plant communities, I could have used maybe data that already exists, that hasn't been published. I could have done a lab experiment. I could have done some mathematical modeling, but I wanted to be outside, which is why I chose to do fieldwork again for my PhD. So in this project, which I'm not done collecting data, otherwise I will tell you the results, but I'm not done yet. Here, you may think, well, it looks very different than what you used to do working with birds and noise pollution. But if you think about it, both projects are about how humans alter ecosystems, right? The first one was noise pollution. This is climate change. And ecosystems is such a broad term, and it can mean it can involve so many organisms and so many questions that I also think I'm kind of like doing a similar experiment than working with birds. And for me, one of the most important findings about my master's degree was not only the results that I got and the experiences that I had, but it was also kind of like finding that I really love ecology more than anything else, and that there are so many questions, ecological questions, that I can explore with other organisms, not just with birds.